First, I would like to welcome all of you to our second NAC Ask Me Anything of the spring 2023 semester. My name is Burcin Becerik-Gerber. I'm an NAC member, and I'm a professor and department chair of the Astani Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at the University of Southern California. So as you might know, the National Academy of Construction was established to recognize our industry leaders. An important purpose of the Academy is to provide a network system of linkage between past and present participants in the construction industry. As such, we have established this Ask Me Anything webinar series to help transfer knowledge to our next generation of construction leaders, you. So it's very simple. Our speakers will make a short presentation on a topic or on their perspective on the industry. And if you haven't already, please email your questions to nacmaa@colorado.edu, and we're going to drop that email link to the chat as well. One student will win $500 scholarship, which will be announced at the end of this event. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Wayne Crew as our Ask Me Anything participant today. Wayne is a retired president and CEO of the National Academy of Construction. Prior to becoming president and CEO, he was the director of the Construction Industry Institute, the renowned research center based at the University of Texas, Austin. He holds a bachelor's degree in civil engineering from Michigan State University and an MBA from the University of Houston. He has over 50 years of experience in engineering, in the engineering and construction industry, and has worked for both owner and contractor firms as well as in research. In his early career, he served in project management and engineering positions for two large companies, Amoco Chemical Corporation and Michigan Chemical Corporation. Later, he served in executive positions at engineering giants, Technip USA and KBR. His roles in research, including serving as the director of research at CII and then as the director of CII. Wayne holds a bachelor's of science degree in civil engineering, and I mentioned that. And he is also a licensed professional engineer in Michigan. He has a keen interest in improving the engineering and construction industry through development and implementation of best practices. And I already realized that you have many questions to Wayne, which is fantastic in this area. And working with Virginia Tech faculty in the aftermath of the tragic 2007 campus shooting there, he created a graduate best practices class taught by industry lecturers and practitioners. And the course is now offered to the industry through CII. With that, I'll pass the microphone to Wayne for his own introduction, and then we're going to move to your questions.
Thank you, Burcin. I'd like to start by sharing my screen and looking at a safety moment here. So here we are. I want to focus a bit on safety in my conversation with you today. The industry, I would call the industry, if you're a process control person, in pretty good control, right? So we only have about 1,000 fatalities a year in our industry, 1,000 fatalities, and we're in control. We have about 100 to 110,000 days away restricted and transfer cases every year, and we're in control. So serious enough injuries where an individual can't go back to work and complete the work that they've been assigned to do or hired to do. So I would say great to be in control, not so great perhaps if you're one of the injured workforce. So thinking about safety and thinking about safety starts here in our minds, right? So if you get up in the morning and if you say you have the lawn to mow today, and you think about safety first, then you start to think, well, gee, I better put some shoes on when I go out, not my flip-flops, but my shoes to mow the grass. Perhaps I'm going to need some gloves or some safety glasses. And you can go through thinking about safety, and then you can think about the lawn you have to mow and getting your lawnmower and exactly what you need. But if you think safe first, and then you wrap the work around your safety thinking, then you'll be safe. And so I want to leave you with that thought as we move into the questions and answers. Think safe first, and then you can work safe, and then you'll be safe.
Great. Thank you, Wayne, for that introduction. Following on the advice that you're giving, I'm going to start with Madison Clunker's question. There are 3 questions, but I'll start with the first one. What do you consider some of the most important best practices to implement in the construction industry as individuals in the construction workforce?
It's a great question. So let me talk about 3 best practices, right? First would be 0 accidents. That's known by many names: 0 accidents, 0 incidents, incident injury-free, are just a couple of names for essentially the same thing. We've proven in the industry that we can work injury-free. We've proven that we can work millions and millions of hours, not without a fatality, not without a lost time or a DART case, but even without a doctor case, without a stitch, without an injury. So I would say implementing incident injury-free or 0 accident techniques is one best practice. Second best practice I would speak to is front-end planning. Again, known by many acronyms: front-end loading, front-end planning in the process industry. It's your planning and schematic design, perhaps in the building industry. But we've proven time and time again, the research is very clear, and the data are very clear, that implementing the best practice of front-end planning allows you to have a significantly higher probability of successful project outcomes: cost, schedule, quality. So front-end planning would be the second one. And then the third one I would say is benchmarking and metrics. So if you're going to improve and you're going to continuously improve your effort, if you don't know where you are, then you don't know how to get to where you need to go. So if you know, for example, that your cost is a 3rd quartile performer, and you know what 1st quartile is, then you know where you're striving to get to. So knowing where you're going, planning to get there, and then continuously improving your work effort. So benchmarking, front-end planning, 0 accidents are the 3 that I guess I would emphasize the most.
Great, thank you so much. Since I am a researcher, I'm going to follow up with a research-related question, and this is Sailor Anglin's question. As the former director of the Construction Industry Institute, what do you feel is the area of research within construction that is lacking the most attention and resource allocation?
Another good question. I think perhaps it's well, I would say a couple of things. Number one, there's a significant amount of research that exists that is there to improve the industry. And I think the implementation of that research, so how you put the research findings into your organization, and then how you design and manage that change moving forward, both perhaps in a pilot effort and then spreading it to the whole of your organization, I think is probably the most challenging piece of what needs to be done. And I think that goes for all segments of our industry. So I would say it's not necessarily the research outcomes, but it's the implementation of those outcomes inside each of our organizations that really makes a significant difference.
That's a very interesting answer, Wayne. So you're telling how we can basically, I mean, we have great amount of research, but how do we get that research into practice, right? I think that's definitely something we need to think about. Following on that thread, there are actually 3 students who are asking more or less same questions related to technology. And as we know, there's a lot of research in the construction industry related to technology. So these students are Farzan Fayyaz, Aklilesh Eraram, and Hassan Dia. Their questions are all related to technologies like virtual augmented reality, virtual machine learning, artificial intelligence, robotics, and site productivity. So I'm going to read one of them to you. So in the current Industry 4.0, what impact will the advancement of virtual reality, augmented reality, AI, ML have on design, planning, and implementation procedure of construction projects in the upcoming years? And how National Academy of Construction is preparing itself and young engineers to prepare to keep up with these latest technology advancements?
Well, I think that the implementation or the leveraging of technologies into the design and the construction industry will have a huge impact in the years to come. And I guess what I would say is it has to have a huge impact. If you look at the demographics of the construction industry, not just the construction industry, but the workforce in the construction industry, it's getting older, and it's reducing in size. So more people leaving the industry than are coming into the industry. And the way that we will be able to do the things that we're asked to do and serve the society as civil engineers with the built environment is through the invention and advent of technologies to replace, to improve the productivities and to replace the workforce that won't be there to do it. So how is it going to be done? Well, that's a great question. And I'm not sure I know exactly how that will be done. I know there are for example, centers, the CRC Construction Research Center up at the University of Alberta, for example, is looking at robotics and how we can use robots inside of again, I'm familiar with industrial facilities, as you could see from my background. So how we might use robots or suits, alien suits to stuff pipe racks and those kinds of things, as opposed to having a tugger on one end and a cherry picker on the other end, and put a piece of pipe up and pull it down. So just boom, boom, boom. And that actually will be pretty cool when we get that to work completely. But it may also require that we change our work processes a little bit. So for example, you might want to put up the first layer of the pipe rack and stuff it full of pipe, and then put up the next layer of the pipe rack and stuff that full of pipe, as opposed to putting the whole pipe rack up. So having 2 vents and then tugging, as opposed to just picking up and putting in. The advent of virtual reality and BIM allows us to essentially build it, right, virtually, and walk through it virtually. So we can look at our work practices. We can, for example, look at where we're placing cranes, and we're doing that today. And I say we're doing that today. Some are doing it today. It's becoming broader and broader used. So, but it's competition, it's vendors, it's executives with a vision that say, pound on the table and say, we're going to use 3D. I use this as an example because it happened in one of my former companies. President one day pounded on his desk and said, we're not doing another project without 3D CAD. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, we had no more excuses to not do our projects in 3D CAD. We did them in 3D CAD. So I think, and in doing so, actually moved significantly ahead of the industry, and turned, at least for a period of time until the industry caught up, that piece of the business into a super winner for the company. So I think it's going to take the advent of the technology and the experience, and it's ultimately going to take an executive that pounds on her or his desk and says, "This is the way it's going to be," and that's the way it happens.
Mm-hmm. Great answer. Thank you, Wayne, for that. Moving from an important topic, which is technology, to another important topic, sustainability, environmental stewardship. So this is a question from Grish Madala. How can we promote sustainability and environmental stewardship in the construction industry? And how can we support the development of sustainable and resilient infrastructure for future generations?
I guess I would say, first of all, we want to realize that the sustainable practices. Let me just give you an example. Terminal B, LaGuardia Terminal B rebuild, took what was described by, I think, President Biden as a third world airport terminal in the largest city in our country, in New York, and turned it into a world-class terminal. And if you haven't been through LaGuardia, it's quite an experience, particularly if you've been through it before and you can go compare. But if you look at what that project did in recycling waste and those kinds of things, so it's an incredible accomplishment that project accomplished. And I think using that as an example and the kudos that it's gotten, mm-hmm. And then in addition to that, realizing that oftentimes it's during the useful life of an asset that sustainability and net zero and all becomes important. I think we keep working at it. I think the awareness has gotten significantly higher. I mm-hmm. think that your generation, the generation that is coming out of undergraduate and graduate school and moving into the industry, is so much more aware of it than I was 50 years ago. That I think it's a movement that's not going to stop and it's going to keep being promoted. So perhaps it's taken a bit longer to build the momentum for sustainable infrastructure, but I think it's there, and I think it's going to continue. And I hope you all accelerate it as you graduate and move into the industry.
Right. And I think this is a great follow-up question, and you touched it a little bit. It's a question from Cyrus Ramdas. What are some of the most prominent barriers or obstacles you saw in the industry holding us back from implementing more efficient and sustainable construction methods? Is it a cultural obstacle, lack of technology, or something else?
So I would say there's a couple of things. Number one is it is cultural, right? So if you go into the field and you go to the 20-year or 25-year tradesman or woman and tell them they have to change how they do their job when they've learned it and they've been doing it for the last 25 years, that becomes an issue. And so culturally, how do we make that change? So I do think it's a bit of a cultural issue, and it's also cultural issues. It's also cultural when you come in with a new technology, right? So this is the way I've done it. This is the way I've been successful. This is the way that I have I've done it for the last 25 years, and it's proved me well. So why would I take the personal risk when I know that the way that I do it works and it provides the desired outcome, and so why would I, as the individual that you're looking to be responsible to bring this project in successfully, and that successfully is defined as safely and on budget and on schedule, why would I take the risk of doing that? So it's a cultural risk aversion issue. And it's also, I think, an issue of risk to our companies, right? Mm. So now here we are, we have a new technology and we're going to go implement it on a project, but I have, as the project organization, I have contracted, if you will, to provide this capital asset to you at a certain price and at a certain schedule. And so I, as the company, don't want to take the risk of putting a new technology in, because I don't know whether that technology is going to prove itself and prove that it does what we say it's going to do. So so what I think we need, well, and then of course there's this risk issue between owners and contractors and subcontractors and designers, that who assumes that risk. And so where I think we ultimately need to get to is sort of a pharma industry approach to clinical trials. And we move from a clinical trial or from a research outcome to a clinical trial, and from a clinical trial to an implementation on a broader scale. Those are the approaches that I think will ultimately help us do that. And it doesn't feel like that gets done overnight. It feels like that takes some time.
No,
I think those clinical trials are really important.
That's an interesting way of thinking about our industry. So you mentioned different parties involved in a project, and I read your amazing bio. You have sat both on the owner side and the contractor side. So this question is from Oluwatobi Osilaja. With a vast wealth of experience in the AEC industry, working both for owners and the contractor firms, what do you think is the reoccurring gap that needs to be bridged between these two parties?
So I think that from my perspective, the gap is one of cultural and perhaps not invented here. And so let me explain that a bit. There was a project that was done, I want to say in the 90s, on field in the North Sea and an oil field development in the North Sea was done in partnership with the owner and the contractor, not just contractor, but contractors. And there was a formula developed to share the rewards for efficiency, both in schedule and in cost, among the major players on that project team. And there was obviously a formula to share the pain associated with if cost and schedule quality didn't measure up. And the project team took that on and really took a hold of it. The field was called Andrew. There's a book written on it. It's in the North Sea. It was a Brown & Root, BP, and several other major players involved in that. And the structure that was developed for it really incented the parties to share, right? So the fabrication was being done by a competitor to Brown & Root. Brown & Root was doing the design, but Brown & Root had the capability to move files directly from design into the fabrication process, as opposed to sending drawings over to a fabricator, letting the fabricator redraw, essentially making fabrication drawings. And Brown & Root shared that technology with that fabricator that was chosen for this project. So that's one example of when overarching that partnership or alliance, or however you want to phrase it, that relationship was really valuable in moving that development forward, and the development of a field that BP had been working to develop for 20 or plus years, right? So BP achieved the economical development of their field. And then the design and construction firms received profit in excess of what they would have received had they done it in a normal relationship. So I think it's the relationships. We couldn't move that relationship out of the North Sea. As long as it was in the North Sea, it worked really well. But we tried to move it, for example, over to the Gulf of Mexico, and both the individuals and all the parties in the Gulf of Mexico kind of went, well, I would never do that, and they didn't. And so that model did not get moved from the North Sea to the Gulf of Mexico or around the globe. And I think you find all of the major owners today, perhaps, and the major EPCs, at least again in the industrial side, struggle with this concept of partnership and how we make it equitable and share. And so it works, and then all of a sudden you have new people move into decision-making positions, and it doesn't work because they would do it differently. So people are getting in the way, probably, is the best way to say that.
Great. Thank you, Wayne. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit, and I'm going to read a question from Jacob Ebal. Maybe Jacob is asking a question that is in mind of other students as well. Comparing the field side of things, managing tasks on site as well as foreman and similar, to the office side of things, engineering, estimating, scheduling, and so, which has a higher salary starting out, like a new graduate or in the first 5 years, and then who would get the higher salary in the long run, let's say 15 years or so. So that's a comparison of field versus office, right?
Sure. Yeah. So That's a great question. So I'm not sure I know exactly the answer to that, but let me tell you what I would counsel you to do as a young engineer coming out of school. And I would counsel you that you need to have field experience. Somewhere or other, you need to find a way to get field experience. You might move into the design office, and my guess is that the civil engineer on average coming out of the University of Texas is going to make the same salary whether she or he goes to an engineer or to a constructor.
Mm-hmm.
But what I would say is that if you move into the engineering office, at some point in time, you need to find a way to get into the field and see how things are put together. And you need to get into the field to experience the people side of being in the field, so that you can this relationship between design and construction is, well, it's another thing that gets in the way, right? So it's that white space between kind of organizations that gets in the way, and those individuals that understand in the design office or on the management teams that understand the transference in that white space from the design and engineering and architect's office to the field, and how it's done in the field will advance further in their careers if they want to than the individual that I believe or than most individuals that I believe stay either in design or construction. Mm-hmm. So managing the overall piece of it and understanding the overall piece of it and the white spaces in between the functions and organizations will push your career along further if that's what you want to do. It's challenging, but it'll be exciting. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And what I'm hearing is there's not a straightforward answer to that question, right?
That's right. Yeah.
So following on advice path, right? I have one student here, Folokami Emuya. And the question is, in choosing a career path as an environmental engineer in the United States, what are the most important factors to consider? And there's a follow-up question. What is the importance of mentorship and career coaching? And how I can be mentored in environmental engineering? So do you have any advice to follow Kami?
Yes, I probably do. First of all, I would say you need to not just stay focused on your studies, although focusing on your studies is maybe number one, but number two, if you have an opportunity for some practical experience, whether it's an internship or whatever during the course of your school, your university work, I would say that in today's world, that's extremely important as you come out of school and you can show that practical experience to a future employer. From a mentoring perspective, I would say this. I think in many ways, the young professional needs to take the initiative to make a connection and ask questions of the seasoned professional. And I say that because it feels to me in today's world that the seasoned professionals are being more and more relied upon to supervise and push forward the progress of design and construction. But they also are willing to and actually need to learn from the younger generation coming out of school. So they're willing to, but making the time to do it is difficult when it's not urgent, right? So if your phone's ringing, it's urgent. Might not be important, but it's urgent. But might be important, but might not be. So let me just give you a couple examples from my career. So I got out of school and promised myself I'd never be a structural engineer, and the first thing I did was start designing structures, right? So that's of course that would be the case. And I was doing a particular design and had never designed any anchor bolts before, so I was trying to figure out how I calculate the forces on an anchor bolt. And one day I walked into my office and there was a little Post-it note on there with a little diagram with an anchor bolt down here and forces up here. And you know, then I start summing moments and summing forces, and voila, there we go. I'm in the middle of designing anchor bolts. But that was my boss, who was a director of engineering, that had seen me at that point in time kind of pondering, and the next thing you know, I have this little thing at my desk. But I guess I asked the question today, not how many bosses recognize that, but how many bosses have the time, because the boss's work has gotten harder and harder and harder and more and more and more as we've pushed more to them, as we've leaned organizations out. I mean, I don't want to say we've done wrong things. We've leaned organizations out, and many of the support positions that existed when I was a young engineer don't exist anymore. I can give you another example of a vice president who I worked for at one of the EPC companies. I was a young project engineering manager. I was actually managing my first engineering project. I'd been a project engineer, but I hadn't been overall responsible for the engineering. And I was in Houston, and I hated the traffic. And so I would get in the office at 6 in the morning or something like that. Well, it turns out he hated the traffic too. And so he would get in the office at 6 in the morning. And, you know, once a week or so, I would have a phone call with him, you know, over a cup of coffee at 6:15 in the morning, and why he tolerated me for months on end, you know, one day a week, chatting about my project. But he tolerated me, and he put up with me. And I think there's more people, more executives, more managers, more seasoned professionals that are willing to do that, if you can get their attention and you can ask them intelligent questions. And I promise you that they need to know from you too. They can learn a ton from you as a recent graduate coming out of school. So it's two-way, but I would just encourage you to take that initiative, and it'll pay off.
Wow, that's a great piece of advice, Wayne. And I think it doesn't only apply to the early career stage. I think it applies throughout, right? We all need advice, and we all need that level of interaction. Following on the advice path again, Miller Parker has this question, and this is a burning question probably for many students. In your early days of finding a job, what are the determining factors in choosing where to work? So the student currently has a great internship, and the student says, I've never experienced work for any other general contractor, but there's a project in a different company that exists, but Miller is not sure if Miller should leave. Should Miller stay or go? Should more experience better, or different experience better?
So I never changed a job without getting more money.
Another good advice, baby.
One of my first criteria, yeah, was to change to get more money. I would say this, and so when I'm thinking of the design and construction industry, I want to bring up safety again, right? I
Mhm.
think that you as a young engineer coming out of undergraduate school have an opportunity to see if you feel that that organization is a fit. And one of the ways that you can do that is you could ask that company about their safety performance. So what is your recordable incident rate? Have you had any fatalities this year? What is your DART incident rate? How do your safety processes connect through planning and planning during design and planning in construction, and then the execution in construction? And it's my observation that those companies that have that excel in safety, and it's I mean, there is a common, it's retrospective, but there's a common benchmark or common benchmarks for safety performance in our industry. If you can, so those companies that their safety performance is superior to others generally have a culture that you want to work in. And those companies that don't have that safety performance, probably you want to look twice at before you make decisions to go to work for them. That would be one of my questions that I would ask.
That's great advice. Alejandra Amador Caro asks, how did you ensure that you didn't compromise your values as an engineer and CEO over the course of your career? They have tough questions, right?
Tough questions. Well, so I would say this. First of all, you have to know what your values are and what's important to you. Okay? So you need to sit down and ask yourself those questions. Just trying to think of an example that I can give you. So during the course of my career, I had an opportunity, and I took an opportunity to do a construction assignment on the North Slope of Alaska, right? Now, at the time I was living in Mobile, Alabama, so it was somewhat of a commute, right? So I lived in a construction camp, right? And like probably every construction camp that has its rules and regulations, those rules and regulations are probably meant to be broken, and or probably thought to be broken. And so so one has to make that decision on what's important to them, and then one has to stand by that decision. But I pretty well knew going into that assignment that there would be opportunities to let my values slip, and I chose not to do that. From a company perspective, I guess one needs to, well, so I guess what I would say is I had a chance to go back and do another assignment after my first project on the North Slope of Alaska, and I chose not to do that. I think you have opportunities, whether they're easy or not opportunities, to make choices, and you can make those choices, and you may find that you find yourself in a situation where you can potentially compromise your values, and you can turn around and walk away. Not the easiest thing in the world to do, not the probably not what mainstream individual will do, but it's your choice. And if you choose to make those decisions and it hurts your career, then you probably didn't want to stay the rest of your career with that organization anyway.
That's true. We are coming to the end of our session. I'm going to end with maybe one last question. Alicia Bates is asking, what advice would you give to a construction PM who would like to start their own business for managing projects?
Start. Start. Well, that's a great question. I think first you need to have, this is just how I would do it. I would probably get a few years of experience to begin with, and then decide that I needed to be my own boss and go be my own boss. And during the course of those first few years of experience, I would make sure that my network grew and grew and grew and grew. This business is a relationship business, and relationships are valuable not just in solving conflicts, but they're valuable in having the right coworkers that you can work with. They're valuable in having the right customers that you can do business with. They're valuable in that award of work that obviously, if you're going to go off and be a constructor, you're going to be looking to win. So I would say some experience. I would say building relationships, and sustaining and maintaining those relationships as you go forward.
Wonderful. On that note, we have a winner. So I'm going to announce our winner for the $500 scholarship. And it is Manekar Akula from the University of New Haven. Congratulations, Manekar. With that, I would like to thank Wayne very much for this wonderful conversation. And I also thank our students for great questions. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Ask Me Anything. And we would love to see you in our next webinar. Thank you so much, Wayne.
Thank you, Burcin.